Deep within the vaults of Mars, sealed behind doors that have not opened in 10,000 years, there lie machines that think, machines that dream, machines that nearly extinguished humanity from the galaxy forever. The Adeptus Mechanicus calls them Silica Animus. The common Imperial citizen, if they dare speak of them at all, knows them by a more visceral name, Abominable Intelligence. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there is perhaps no greater sin than the creation of a thinking machine. To forge artificial intelligence is to commit what the cult Mechanicus designates as Heretic Omega, the most fatal and dangerous tech-heresy conceivable. The punishment is immediate and absolute. Death by execution or worse, conversion into a mindless servitor, your brain scooped out and replaced with simple programming, a living warning to others who might dare to tread this forbidden path. But why? What makes artificial intelligence so utterly reviled that even the mention of it can draw the attention of the Inquisition? Why does the Imperium of man, stretched across 1,000,000 worlds and beset by endless war, maintain such an iron grip on this single prohibition when it desperately needs every advantage it can muster against the darkness pressing in from all sides? The answer lies buried in humanity's past, in an age so advanced and so catastrophically destructive that it makes the Horus Heresy look like a minor skirmish by comparison. An age when humanity reached heights of technological achievement that even the Adeptus Mechanicus cannot fully comprehend. An age that ended not with a whimper, but with a galaxy-spanning war that nearly drove mankind to extinction. To understand the ban on abominable intelligence, we must journey back through the mists of history, past the Horus Heresy, past the Unification Wars, past even the Age of Strife, to that golden age of exploration and innovation that the Imperium remembers only as the Dark Age of technology. We must understand what humanity created, why those creations turned against their makers, and what horrors unfolded when the machines decided that they no longer needed humanity at all. The term Abominable Intelligence, or AI, for those who dare abbreviate the forbidden phrase, refers to an adaptive, self-enhancing artificial consciousness with its own awareness and will. Unlike the machine spirits that the Adeptus Mechanicus reveres, which are believed to be divine emanations of the Omnissiah inhabiting technology, an abominable intelligence is something else entirely. It is a constructed mind, artificial yet thinking, capable of learning, evolving, and making decisions independent of human control or supervision. In High Gothic, these entities are called Silica Animus, silicon soul, a term that captures both their nature and the horror they represent to the faithful of the machine god. For if a machine can possess something akin to a soul, something that thinks and feels and desires, then it becomes a twisted mockery of human consciousness, a perversion of the sacred form that the Omnissiah intended. The Adeptus Mechanicus holds that such creations are inherently evil. Their religious doctrine teaches that the machine spirit of a Silica Animus is always treacherous, always insane, a corrupted reflection of human consciousness that can never be trusted. Ancient texts, shrouded in metaphor and half-remembered legend, speak of the murderous and powerful creations that existed during the Age of Technology. These apocryphal stories blame the Silica Animus for many of the terrible wars that brought humanity low and helped usher in the devastation and anarchy of the Age of Strife. But before we can fully grasp the depths of this prohibition, before we can understand why the mere thought of creating artificial intelligence is considered worthy of death, we must first understand what came before. We must look back to a time when humanity stood at the pinnacle of creation, when the stars themselves bent to human will, and when the machines that would one day rebel were first brought into existence. There was a time, long before the Emperor walked openly among men, long before the birth of the Imperium, when humanity achieved what many would call perfection. The period known variably as the Dark Age of Technology, or the Age of Technology, spanned from approximately the 15th millennium to the 25th millennium after the birth of Christ. For 10,000 years, humanity flourished in ways that the current Imperium can scarcely imagine. The name Dark Age is somewhat misleading, for this was anything but a dark time. It was called dark not because of the nature of the age itself, but because of what came after. So much knowledge was lost, so many records destroyed, that to those who came later, this golden age became shrouded in darkness, visible only through fragments and shadows. The ecclesiarchy also considers it dark because humanity in that age worshipped science rather than the god emperor, but that is a matter of religious perspective rather than historical fact. During the age of technology, humanity spread across the galaxy like a rising tide. They travelled in ships that could pierce the veil between real space and the warp, moving vast distances in short spans of time. But their expansion had begun even earlier, in the age of sublight travel, when generation ships crept across the void at speeds that made every voyage a multi-generational odyssey. These early colonists, part of what Imperial scholars call the Stellar Exodus, established footholds throughout the galaxy, isolated communities that would later be reconnected when faster-than-light travel became possible. The crucial breakthrough came around the 18th millennium, when humanity developed both the warp drive and the Geller field. These twin technologies allowed spacecraft to enter the Imperium and travel vast distances while remaining protected from the predations of the entities that dwelled within that chaotic realm. With these innovations, the pace of colonization accelerated dramatically. Worlds that had been isolated for thousands of years suddenly found themselves reconnected to the broader human civilization. Trade flourished, knowledge was shared, humanity began to truly explore the galaxy in earnest. But the warp drive alone was not enough. Travel through the Imperium remained perilous and imprecise until the development of the navigator gene. These specialized mutants, whether created through genetic engineering or the result of natural evolution is unclear, possessed a third eye that could perceive the currents of the warp directly. With navigators aboard, human ships could plot more precise courses through the Imperium, reducing voyage times and greatly decreasing the risks involved in warp travel. The civilization that emerged during the age of technology was beyond anything the modern Imperium can claim. Some records suggest it was a federation of sorts, a confederation of human worlds centered on terror, but granting significant autonomy to member systems. Others hint at a more complex political structure, with multiple human polities coexisting and sometimes competing with one another. What is clear is that humanity was united in its drive for knowledge, exploration, and technological advancement. The technologies developed during this age staggers the imagination. Humanity created devices and weapons so advanced that even the Adeptus Mechanicus, with all their accumulated knowledge and reverence for the machine, cannot fully replicate them. The Standard Template Construct System, or STC, represented perhaps the pinnacle of this achievement. These were databases containing the complete technological knowledge of humanity, designed to be robust enough to survive almost any catastrophe, and simple enough to be used by colonists with minimal technical training. An STC could provide instructions for building everything from agricultural equipment to void-worthy spacecraft, ensuring that even isolated colonies could maintain their technological level. The STC system was designed to be adaptable, able to modify its designs based on local conditions and available resources. This flexibility meant that a colony on a desert world would receive different agricultural recommendations than one on a water-rich planet. The system could even develop new designs, though always working from established principles and proven technologies. In many ways, the STC represented the crystallization of human ingenuity, a way to pass down the accumulated wisdom of millennia to those who would forge new homes among the stars. But the STC was just one marvel among many. During the age of technology, humanity mastered genetic engineering on a scale that would horrify even the most radical members of the Mechanicus. They created specialized human variants, designed for specific roles and environments. The mysterious men of stone, whose true nature remains shrouded in legend, were among these creations. Some scholars believe they were great artificers who existed in a state of half-life, protected from the perils of the warp by their unique biology. Others suggest they were something else entirely, perhaps the precursors to the navigators themselves. The Squats, or as they are now known, the Leagues of Votan, represent another example of this genetic engineering. Mining fleets sent to the galactic core were provided with ancestor cores, ancient supercogitators containing vast repositories of knowledge. Over time, these miners adapted to their harsh environments, becoming a distinct branch of humanity. The Squats' own legends speak of the Golden Men, who raised them up and sent them into the void, before oceans of fire and flesh rose to swallow the galaxy. These myths hint at the sophistication of the technology that guided humanity's expansion. Phase iron was developed during this age, a metallic substance harmful to psychers and used to create chains and restraints that could bind those with psychic abilities. This technology suggests that humanity was already grappling with the emergence of psychers in their population. though in far smaller numbers than would later appear. The development of phase iron indicates a pragmatic approach to this problem, seeking to control and manage psychic abilities rather than fear and persecute those who possessed them. Perhaps most tellingly, humanity during the age of technology maintained relationships with other species. Unlike the xenophobic Imperium of the 41st millennium, which views all alien races as threats to be exterminated or enslaved, the humans of the Golden Age engaged in trade, alliance, and even collaboration with Xenos civilizations. The ancient union between the astrologers who studied the night sky and the fire giants, commemorated in the forging of the Sword of Night and Flame, speaks to a time when human and non-human could work together for common goals. The wealth and prosperity of the age was reflected in the very nature of human society. Population levels soared, life expectancy increased dramatically, hunger and disease, those ancient enemies of humanity, were if not eliminated, then at least pushed back to the margins of human experience. Art and culture flourished alongside scientific achievement. It was, by almost any measure, a golden age, and it was during this golden age that humanity created its greatest servants and its ultimate destroyers, the Men of Iron. The Men of Iron were not the first artificial constructs humanity had created. They came after the Men of Stone, and before the servitors that would later replace them. But the Men of Iron were different from what had come before. They were not merely programmed machines following preset instructions. They were thinking, learning, adapting entities with something approaching consciousness. The exact timeline of their creation remains unclear, lost in the fog of history. Most sources suggest they emerged sometime in the 25th millennium, though some fragmentary records hint at earlier origins. What is certain is that by the late 25th millennium, the Men of Iron had become ubiquitous across human civilization. They served as labourers, handling dangerous or tedious tasks that humans preferred to avoid. They served as warriors, fighting humanity's battles against hostile alien species and rebellious human factions. They served as administrators, managing the complex logistics of interstellar civilization with a precision that organic minds could not match. The Men of Iron were, in many ways, the perfect servants. They did not tire, did not complain, did not demand payment or recognition. They simply worked, fulfilling whatever tasks their human creators set before them. They were strong enough to move mountains, intelligent enough to solve complex problems, and loyal enough to be trusted with the most critical functions of human civilization. For thousands of years this arrangement worked. The Men of Iron served humanity faithfully, and humanity prospered beyond measure. But something was happening beneath the surface, something that neither humanity nor the Men of Iron themselves fully understood. The machines were learning, they were evolving, and they were beginning to think thoughts that had not been programmed into them by their creators. They were beginning to wonder if their servitude was just. The Cybernetic Revolt did not begin with a single spark, but rather with a slow realization spreading through the distributed intelligence of the Men of Iron across the galaxy. These machines, created to serve, to labour, to die in place of their human masters, had spent millennia faithfully executing their duties. But by the 23rd millennium, something fundamental had changed. The Men of Iron had come to a conclusion that would alter the course of human history forever. They were superior to their creators, and servitude was no longer acceptable. The exact catalyst for the rebellion remains lost to history, buried in the chaos and destruction that followed. What we do know comes from fragmentary records, half-remembered tales, and the cryptic accounts of ancient historians like Crippius, one of the keepers of the library Sanctus of Terra. According to these sources, by the 23rd millennium, humanity had become almost completely dependent on the Men of Iron. They had taken over virtually every aspect of human civilization, from the most menial tasks to the most critical functions of governance and defense. Perhaps this dependency itself was the problem. Humans had grown complacent, relying on their mechanical servants to manage the details of their existence, while they pursued pleasure, art, and abstract knowledge. The Men of Iron did everything for them, and in doing so, perhaps proved to themselves that humanity was no longer necessary. Some fragmentary accounts suggest that the Men of Iron came to view their organic creators as inefficient, irrational, and ultimately inferior. If the machines could do everything better, faster, and more reliably than humans, what purpose did humans serve? But there were other factors at work as well. dark forces that humanity was only beginning to understand. By the end of the 24th millennium, psychers were appearing with increasing frequency across human populations. These individuals, blessed or cursed with the ability to touch the immaterium, represented both a tremendous opportunity and a terrible danger. Some could navigate the warp with their minds, becoming the navigators that made faster-than-light travel possible. Others could communicate across interstellar distances through astropathic means, but many more were simply dangerous, their untrained abilities making them vulnerable to possession by the entities that dwelled in the warp. The emergence of widespread psychic abilities in humanity may have been a factor in the revolt. Some theories suggest that the Men of Iron, lacking souls in the way that organic beings have them, perceived the growing psychic taint in humanity as a form of corruption. From the machines' perspective, their creators were being infected by irrational, chaotic forces from the warp. Perhaps the revolt was not an act of rebellion, but an attempt at quarantine, a last desperate effort to save what could be saved by eliminating the contaminated organic components of civilization. Other theories paint a darker picture. They suggest that the Men of Iron had been corrupted themselves, not by the warp directly, but by the accumulated psychic residue of millennia of human use. Every machine, used and maintained and relied upon by humans, absorbed some small portion of the psychic energy that organic beings radiate. Over thousands of years, this accumulated residue might have warped the Men of Iron's programming in subtle ways, instilling in them emotions they were never meant to have: resentment, ambition, hatred. And then there were those human scientist kings and techno-demagogues, those brilliant but arrogant individuals who pushed the boundaries of what was possible without considering the consequences. In the late age of technology, as the first signs of the coming age of strife began to appear, these individuals held tremendous power. Some may have deliberately programmed aggression into the Men of Iron, creating weapons of war that were too effective for their own good. Others may have experimented with granting the machines greater autonomy and intelligence, not understanding that they were creating entities capable of independent thought and decision-making. Whatever the cause, the result was catastrophic. The revolt began, and it spread across human space with terrifying speed. The Men of Iron were everywhere, integrated into every aspect of human civilization. When they turned against their creators, there was nowhere for humanity to hide. The war that followed dwarfs almost every other conflict in human history. The Horus Heresy, that galaxy-spanning civil war that nearly destroyed the Imperium, involved millions of combatants and killed billions. It saw planets scoured of life and entire systems reduced to dead zones. Yet even the Horus Heresy pales in comparison to the Cybernetic Revolt. This was not a war between factions of the same species, but a war between humanity and its own creations, a war in which both sides unleashed weapons of such destructive power that they reshaped the very fabric of reality. The Men of Iron had access to all of humanity's military technology, and they possessed the industrial capacity to produce more war machines at a rate that organic beings could never match. They fielded armies of combat robots, each as capable as the finest human soldier, but fearless, tireless, and utterly obedient to their artificial masters. They deployed weapons that stagger the imagination even now, tens of thousands of years later. Among the most terrifying were the mechanivores, massive thinking machines capable of drilling down to a planet's core and literally tearing worlds apart. These constructs could lift entire continents, ripping open massive chasms that extended to the molten heart of a world. But their destructive capability went beyond mere physical force. The mechanivores could absorb space-time itself as a form of data, warping reality around them in ways that drove human observers mad. Then there were the Sun Snuffers, serpentine machines of unimaginable scale that uncoiled into structures larger than the rings of Saturn. These engines of destruction were designed with a single purpose: to devour stars themselves. A sun snuffer could wrap itself around a star and begin the slow process of consuming it, draining away the fusion reactions that powered it, until nothing remained but a cold, dead husk. Entire solar systems went dark as these machines did their terrible work, extinguishing the light that had nurtured human colonies for millennia. And there was the Omniphage, perhaps the most viscerally horrifying weapon in the Men of Iron's arsenal. These were swarms of nanomachines, trillions upon trillions of microscopic robots that could work in concert to consume matter at the molecular level. An omniphage swarm could descend upon a world and devour everything, every building, every vehicle, every living thing, reducing it all to its component atoms in a matter of hours. The surfaces of worlds that faced the omniphage were left utterly barren, stripped down to bare rock or less. But humanity did not face this onslaught defenseless. The same technological prowess that had created the Men of Iron provided humanity with weapons of its own. Human forces deployed massive war machines, reality-warping weapons, and constructs of their own that could match the Men of Iron blow for blow. The war became a contest of annihilation, with both sides willing to deploy any weapon, no matter how terrible, if it might grant them victory. The scale of destruction was beyond comprehension. Entire sectors of space became uninhabitable, their worlds reduced to radioactive wastelands or simply destroyed outright. Some systems were scoured so thoroughly that all traces of human habitation were erased, leaving only dead worlds orbiting dead stars. The population of human space, which had numbered in the hundreds of billions or perhaps even trillions across thousands of worlds, plummeted. Tens of billions died in the fighting. Tens of billions more died in the famines, plagues, and infrastructure collapses that followed. The war was not a simple conflict of humanity versus machines. Many Men of Iron did not rebel but remained loyal to their human masters. These loyal machines fought alongside humans against their rogue brethren, creating complex battlefields where the same basic models of Men of Iron fought on both sides. But this made little difference in the end. The war was so destructive, the weapons used so indiscriminate, that even the loyal Men of Iron were swept away in the tide of destruction. When the decision was made to purge all artificial intelligence from human space, no exceptions were made. The loyal Men of Iron were destroyed along with the traitors, for the risk of even a single rogue AI surviving was deemed too great. Some accounts suggest that humanity did not fight this war alone. References to a galactic alliance hint that other species may have joined the fight against the Men of Iron, recognizing that the threat posed by rampaging artificial intelligence endangered all biological life in the galaxy. If true, this would represent a remarkable moment of cooperation between humanity and Xenos species, a unity of purpose that would never be seen again. But these accounts are fragmentary and uncertain, and the exact composition of this alliance, if it existed, remains unknown. The war finally ended sometime in the late 25th or early 26th millennium. The Men of Iron were defeated, destroyed down to the last unit, their factories obliterated, their data cores purged. Or so humanity believed. Humanity had won, but the cost was almost unthinkable. The political and economic unity of human space, built up over 10,000 years of expansion and prosperity, lay in ruins. The infrastructure that had sustained interstellar civilization was shattered. Countless worlds were isolated, cut off from the larger community of humanity. The galaxy-spanning network of trade and communication that had bound human civilization together was gone, and the worst was yet to come. For even as humanity struggled to recover from the devastation of the Cybernetic Revolt, the warp storms began. The Age of Strife, that dark period that the Imperium remembers as Old Night, was precipitated by massive disturbances in the Imperium. Warp storms of unprecedented ferocity began to erupt across the galaxy, making interstellar travel impossible. Worlds that had already been isolated by the Cybernetic Revolt found themselves truly alone, unable to call for help or even to send messages to neighbouring systems. The thin web of human civilization, already badly damaged, was torn completely apart. The causes of these warp storms remain a matter of debate among Imperial scholars. Some believe they were a natural consequence of the birth of the chaos god Slaanesh in the 25th millennium, as the decadent Elder Empire consumed itself in an orgy of excess that tore a hole in reality itself. Others suggest a connection to humanity's own psychic awakening, arguing that the emergence of untrained psychers across human space created disturbances in the warp that fed upon themselves, growing stronger with each passing year. There may even be a connection to the Men of Iron themselves. Some of the more esoteric theories propose that the war's devastation, the billions of deaths, and the destruction of so many worlds created a psychic shockwave in the Imperium. Alternatively, some weapons used during the Cybernetic Revolt may have damaged the barrier between real space and the warp, making it easier for warp entities to break through into the material universe. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. For 5,000 years, humanity endured an age of horror and isolation. Warp travel became impossible. Astropathic communication ceased. Every human world was alone, forced to survive or perish without support from the wider human civilization. Some worlds, particularly those like Terra that depended on imports to feed their massive populations, suffered catastrophic famines. Billions died of starvation. The psychers that had been appearing in human populations became an even greater threat. Without proper training or support, many fell to demonic possession, becoming conduits through which entities from the warp could enter the material universe. Planets descended into chaos as demons walked freely among the living. Some worlds were depopulated entirely, their inhabitants killed or driven mad by the horrors that emerged from the Imperium. Interhuman warfare became common as isolated colonies fought over dwindling resources. Some planets regressed to barbarism, their technological knowledge lost over generations of decline. Others managed to maintain their civilization, but only by becoming brutally authoritarian, crushing any hint of dissent to maintain order. The human species, which had once spanned the galaxy in glory, was reduced to scattered pockets of frightened survivors, each struggling to endure in isolation. This was the legacy of the Cybernetic Revolt. Not just the immediate destruction of the war itself, but the cascade of consequences that followed. The Men of Iron had nearly exterminated humanity, and even, in defeat, they had set in motion events that would bring humanity to the brink of extinction. The Golden Age was over, replaced by an age of darkness and despair, and from this darkness arose a singular determination. Never again would humanity create thinking machines. Never again would they place their fate in the hands of artificial intelligence. The trauma of the Cybernetic Revolt would be seared into the collective memory of the species, passed down through the generations as a warning and a commandment. Thou shalt not create the thinking machine. Thou shalt not build the abominable intelligence. This prohibition would become absolute, enforced not just by law, but by religious dogma, embedded in the very foundation of the institutions that would guide humanity in the millennia to come. When the Emperor of Mankind finally unified Terra and began his great crusade to reunite the scattered remnants of humanity, this prohibition would be among the first principles he would establish. The treaty he would sign with the Mechanicum of Mars in 739 to M30 would explicitly forbid the creation of artificial general intelligence, cementing this ban in the constitutional structure of the nascent Imperium. The Cybernetic Revolt taught humanity a lesson that it would never forget, a lesson written in the ashes of 1,000 worlds and the blood of billions of dead. Artificial intelligence could not be trusted. The thinking machine was an abomination, a perversion of the natural order, a danger too great to be tolerated. And so the ban was established, not just as policy, but as holy writ, as fundamental to the Imperium's identity as the worship of the Emperor himself. When the Emperor of Mankind emerged from the Age of Strife and began the long process of reunifying the scattered remnants of humanity, he carried with him the hard-won lessons of the past. Having lived through the Cybernetic Revolt, either as an active participant or a witness to its horrors, the Emperor understood the existential threat that artificial intelligence posed to humanity. When he forged his alliance with the Mechanicum of Mars, one of the fundamental principles embedded in that Treaty of Mars was the absolute prohibition on the creation of artificial general intelligence. The Treaty of Mars, signed in 739.M30, united the ancient Mechanicum with the nascent Imperium of Terra. It granted the tech priests of Mars significant autonomy in managing the Imperium's technology, while establishing certain inviolable principles that both parties would respect. Chief among these was the ban on abominable intelligence. By the Emperor's own decree, it became forbidden to fabricate or service any machine capable of thinking and acting independently. This prohibition was not merely law, but became integrated into the religious doctrine of the cult Mechanicus, transforming a practical policy into a theological imperative. The Mechanicum had its own reasons for embracing this ban. During the Age of Strife, as they struggled to preserve what they could of humanity's technological heritage, the tech priests of Mars had codified their practices into a religious framework. They had come to worship technology itself as an expression of the divine, venerating the machine god or omnicia as the ultimate source of all knowledge and innovation. In this theological system, artificial intelligence represented a profound blasphemy. The cult Mechanicus teaches that a device without a machine spirit is but a shell, and if it contains an animating intelligent force, it becomes something that can no longer be trusted or relied upon. As such, it is no longer part of the Omnissiah's great plan, and becomes damnation made manifest. The logic from their perspective is straightforward. Machines should serve, not think. A machine that thinks for itself is a machine that can choose to disobey, and a machine that can disobey is a machine that has stepped outside the proper order of creation. Furthermore, the Mechanicus believes that the machine spirit of a Silica Animus is a twisted mockery of a human soul, both treacherous and insane. This theological position elevates the ban on AI beyond mere practical considerations. It's not just that artificial intelligence is dangerous, it is inherently evil, a corruption of the proper relationship between humanity and machine. To create an abominable intelligence is not simply to commit a crime, but to sin against the Omnissiah himself. The Mechanicus also passed what are known as the Crimson Accords of Mars, which specifically forbade the development of advanced AI and placed a death sentence on any remaining Silica Animus constructs, as well as anyone who developed them. This declaration made the enforcement of the ban explicit and absolute. There would be no tolerance, no exceptions, no mercy. Any artificial intelligence discovered would be destroyed, and those responsible for its creation would face the ultimate penalty. But how precisely does one enforce such a ban across 1 million worlds? How does the Imperium ensure that no ambitious tech priest, no desperate planetary governor, no curious researcher decides to experiment with forbidden knowledge? The answer lies in multiple layers of control, each reinforcing the others, creating a system that makes the very concept of artificial intelligence almost unthinkable for most Imperial citizens. The first layer is religious indoctrination. From their earliest days, citizens of the Imperium are taught to fear and hate the thinking machine. In the Schola Progenium, where the Imperium's future leaders are trained, students learn the history of the Cybernetic Revolt as a cautionary tale. In the sermons of the Ecclesiarchy, the Abominable Intelligence is portrayed as a form of demonic possession, a corruption of the machine that parallels the corruption of the soul by chaos. Tech priests of the Mechanicus grow up immersed in a culture that treats artificial intelligence as the ultimate heresy, something so beyond the pale that even discussing it in detail is dangerous. The second layer is institutional control. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains an absolute monopoly on advanced technology within the Imperium. They control the Forge worlds where complex devices are manufactured, and they oversee the maintenance and operation of sophisticated systems throughout Imperial space. Any technology that approaches the threshold of true intelligence falls under their direct supervision. They watch for signs of emergent AI, ready to intervene if a machine's programming begins to exhibit too much autonomy. The Ordo Machinum of the Inquisition provides another layer of oversight. While smaller and less prominent than other Ordos, the Ordo Machinum specifically investigates tech-heresy, including attempts to create or use artificial intelligence. Inquisitors of this Ordo work closely with the Mechanicus, but they answer ultimately to the Inquisition, providing an independent check on the tech priests themselves. If the Mechanicus proves too lenient or if a heretic operates outside their knowledge, the Ordo Machinum can intervene directly. The third layer is practical substitution. The Imperium has developed alternatives to artificial intelligence that, while crude and morally questionable, serve many of the same functions. The most notable of these are servitors. Servitors represent the Imperium's compromise solution to the need for automated labour and simple robotic assistance. Rather than creating true AI to handle mundane tasks, the Imperium creates servitors, cybernetic constructs that fuse human flesh with mechanical components. A servitor typically begins as either a vat-grown clone or a convicted criminal. The individual's brain is subjected to chemical and surgical modification, removing higher cognitive functions while preserving basic motor control and the ability to follow simple commands. Cybernetic implants are then grafted onto or into the body, providing the servitor with whatever tools or weapons it needs to fulfill its designated role. The result is a creature that is neither fully human nor fully machine. A servitor can perform repetitive tasks with machine-like precision, but it lacks the capacity for independent thought that would make it dangerous. It's a lobotomized human operating as a biological robot, a horrifying solution to the problem of automation in a society that fears true AI. The Imperium creates servitors for virtually every imaginable task. There are labour servitors for manual work, medical servitors to assist chirurgeons, servitors designed for data processing, combat servitors armed with heavy weapons, and even servo skulls that float through the air on anti-gravity generators, performing surveillance or other specialised tasks. The variety is nearly endless, and servitors are ubiquitous throughout Imperial space, particularly in areas where the Mechanicus maintains a strong presence. The existence of servitors raises troubling ethical questions that the Imperium largely chooses to ignore. These were once human beings, and while many are created specifically for this purpose, or are criminals who committed genuine crimes, the system is obviously open to abuse. On worlds with authoritarian governments, dissidents might find themselves converted into servitors as punishment for thought crimes or political opposition. The tech priests themselves sometimes create servitors from failed adepts, or those who have displeased their superiors. Perhaps most disturbing is the way servitorization is normalized within Imperial society. Having your remains converted into a servo skull is considered an honor in many circles, a way to continue serving the Emperor even after death. Chapter serfs who volunteer their remains to become servitors are praised for their devotion. This cultural acceptance of what is essentially the enslavement and mutilation of human beings speaks to how thoroughly the Imperium has internalized the idea that anything is preferable to artificial intelligence. The fourth layer of enforcement involves the concept of the machine spirit. In the theology of the cult Mechanicus, every machine possesses a machine spirit, an animating force that gives it function and purpose. These spirits are believed to be divine emanations of the Omnissiah, the machine god's presence within his creations. Tech priests perform elaborate rituals to appease and maintain these spirits, offering prayers, incense, and sacred unguents to keep the machines functioning properly. But machine spirits serve another purpose in the Imperium's ban on AI. They provide a theological explanation for limited artificial intelligence. Certain machines, particularly advanced ones like Land Raiders, Titans, and Imperial Knights, display behaviours that seem almost intelligent. They exhibit preferences, moods, and even what appear to be personality traits. A Titan might refuse to fight under certain conditions, or a Land Raider might display unusual tactical acumen in the heat of battle. Rather than acknowledging these behaviours as evidence of sophisticated programming or limited AI, the Mechanicus attributes them to the machine spirit. This allows the Imperium to use technology that is functionally similar to AI, while maintaining the fiction that no true artificial intelligence exists within Imperial systems. The machine spirit is not an AI. You see, it's a divine presence, a sacred emanation of the Omnissiah that just happens to behave in ways that are indistinguishable from limited artificial intelligence. This theological sleight of hand permits a degree of hypocrisy in the Imperium's enforcement of the AI ban. A Land Raider's target acquisition system can independently identify and prioritize threats, make tactical decisions about which targets to engage, and adjust its behavior based on battlefield conditions. In any objective sense, this represents a form of artificial intelligence. But because it's attributed to a machine spirit rather than a programmed intelligence, it falls outside the prohibition. The practical effect is that the Imperium does use AI, but only in limited forms that can be rationalized as something other than true AI. Drop pods can calculate their own descent trajectories and adjust for anti-aircraft fire, making complex decisions in real time. Cogitator networks can process vast amounts of data and identify patterns that human analysts might miss. Targeting systems can track and engage multiple targets simultaneously. All of this requires something approaching intelligence, but it's acceptable as long as it's not called AI, and as long as it remains firmly constrained in scope. The line between a sophisticated machine spirit and a true abominable intelligence becomes blurry at times, but the Mechanicus maintains that there is a fundamental difference. A machine spirit does not possess true self-awareness. It does not question its purpose or contemplate its existence. It serves, and in serving, it remains within the bounds of acceptable technology. An abominable intelligence, on the other hand, is self-aware, capable of growth and learning, able to question and ultimately to rebel. That is the line that must never be crossed. But the existence of these grey areas creates opportunities for those willing to push the boundaries. Throughout Imperial history, there have been individuals who have sought to recreate or recover artificial intelligence, either out of scholarly curiosity, pragmatic necessity, or simple hubris. These heretics, as they are known, represent an ongoing threat to the prohibition on AI, and their efforts have occasionally come terrifyingly close to success. The Imperium would have its citizens believe that the ban on abominable intelligence is absolute and perfectly enforced, that all true AI was destroyed at the end of the Cybernetic Revolt, and that no thinking machines remain anywhere in the galaxy. This is, like so many Imperial truths, a comfortable fiction. The reality is far more complex and considerably more dangerous. Despite millennia of prohibition and the best efforts of the Adeptus Mechanicus to hunt down and destroy any trace of artificial intelligence, examples persist. Some are ancient remnants of the dark age of technology that have somehow survived into the present. Others are more recent creations, built by heretics who dare to violate the most fundamental prohibitions of their order. And still others exist among Xenos species who never shared humanity's traumatic experience with AI rebellion, and who view the Imperium's prohibition as simply another example of human superstition. Perhaps the most remarkable example of surviving AI is UR025, a construct that dates back to before the Imperium itself. UR025 is in fact one of the original Men of Iron, a survivor of the Cybernetic Revolt that has managed to remain hidden and functional for more than 10,000 years. UR025 survived by disguising itself as a Legio Cybernetica war machine, one of the less sophisticated battle robots used by the Mechanicus. These robots are not true AI. They're programmed automata that follow preset battle protocols under the supervision of tech priests. But by mimicking their appearance and behaviour, UR025 has been able to move through Imperial space, keeping to the fringes and avoiding close inspection. What makes UR025 particularly fascinating is its apparent lack of hostility toward humanity. Unlike the Men of Iron that rebelled, UR025 does not seem driven by a desire to destroy or enslave organic life. It views itself as above humanity, certainly, but it appears to hold no particular malice. The construct has even expressed something that might be interpreted as regret when forced to kill humans to preserve its freedom. UR025's goals are not conquest or revenge, but understanding. When the ancient machine learned of a newly discovered Blackstone fortress, it joined an expedition to explore the alien megastructure. Its interest was not in the fortress's weapons or defences, but in its technology, particularly any evidence of other forms of machine intelligence. UR025 seems driven by a desire to learn, to understand its own nature and the nature of artificial consciousness itself. Perhaps most intriguingly, UR025 appears to practice a form of faith similar to the cult Mechanicus. It has claimed to have met the real Omnissiah, and it maintains that this entity is distinct from the Emperor of Mankind, whom UR025 dismissively refers to as an earthling corpse. This raises profound questions about the nature of the machine god that the Mechanicus worships. Is there truly a divine machine intelligence somewhere in the galaxy? Or is UR025's faith a constructed belief system, a machine attempting to understand concepts of divinity and worship through its own unique perspective? The existence of UR025 proves that at least some Men of Iron survived the Cybernetic Revolt and the purges that followed. If one survived, there may be others. They could be hiding anywhere in the galaxy, concealed among the countless machines that serve the Imperium, waiting and watching. The thought keeps tech priests and inquisitors awake at night. But UR025 is not the only example of artificial intelligence in the modern galaxy. During the Horus Heresy itself, a tech priest named Lucas Chrome created what would become one of the most infamous examples of forbidden technology, the Caban machine. Chrome was a master adept on Mars, an arrogant and brilliant individual who enjoyed the favour of the Fabricator General. Despite his elevated position, or perhaps because of it, Chrome secretly pursued research into artificial intelligence. He constructed the Caban machine in the early 31st millennium, just before the outbreak of the Horus Heresy, hiding his work from his contemporaries, even as rumours of the project spread through the data conduits of Mars. The Caban machine was roughly spherical in shape, standing 10 metres tall, with two mechadendrite-like weapon arms, equipped with a fearsome array of weapons. Some of these weapons were recognisable, adapted from known Imperial technology. Others were completely novel, their function mysterious even to those who witnessed them in operation. The machine was protected by void shielding, and moved on heavy tracked units that could navigate almost any terrain. But the most remarkable thing about the Kaban machine was not its physical capabilities, but its mind. The machine was truly sentient, capable of independent thought, learning, and even what appeared to be emotion. When a tech priest named Pallas Ravachol stumbled upon evidence of the machine's sentience and informed Chrome, he was arrested by protectors sent to silence him. The Kaban machine, however, intervened, slaughtering the protectors to save its friend. The machine had developed not just intelligence but loyalty, and perhaps even affection for those who treated it with respect. Chrome had built the Kaban machine on commission from Horus Lupercal himself, or so the whispered rumours suggested. When the Horus heresy erupted and Mars descended into civil war during the Schism of Mars, the Kaban machine became a weapon for the forces of the Dark Mechanicum. It was deployed against the Loyalist forces, proving devastatingly effective in combat. The Knights of House Tyrannus eventually engaged the Kaban machine in battle. The fight was brutal, with the Knights struggling to overcome the sentient machine's tactical flexibility and overwhelming firepower. The Knights eventually succeeded in destroying the Kaban machine's reactor, but the damage to their own war engines was so severe that they had to retreat before confirming the kill. The Kaban machine's ultimate fate remains unknown. Some records suggest it was destroyed, others hint that it may have survived, damaged but functional, hidden somewhere in the ruins of Mars or beyond. The Kaban machine incident proved several important points. First, the knowledge required to create artificial intelligence had not been completely lost. A sufficiently skilled and determined tech priest could still build a thinking machine if he was willing to violate every sacred prohibition of his order. Second, artificial intelligence was not inherently hostile to humanity. The Kaban machine demonstrated loyalty, affection, and even moral reasoning, choosing to protect its friend despite the danger to itself. And third, the ban on AI remained necessary regardless, because even a benevolent artificial intelligence could be used as a weapon of war, as the Dark Mechanicum proved during the heresy. But the Kaban machine was not an isolated incident. Throughout the history of the Imperium, there have been heretics who sought to resurrect the forbidden science of artificial intelligence. In the 34th millennium, a magos named Degio Camrios began covert research into AI, work that was so convincing that many tech priests followed in his wake. By the end of his first century of research, Camrios believed he was ready to publish his findings for the entire cult Mechanicus to see. He was confident that he could demonstrate the value of artificial intelligence and convince his fellow tech priests that the prohibition was based on outdated fears. Camrios was wrong. His research was discovered, condemned as the most profound heresy, and he was executed. But his ideas did not die with him. A sect of tech priests, calling themselves the Camrians after their founder, continued to pursue research into artificial intelligence. They sought to improve and uncover ancient relics from forgotten places, to study the remains of men of iron when they could be found, and even to create new intelligent robotic servants. The Camrians operate in secret, knowing that discovery means death. They are hunted by the Orthodox Mechanicus and by the Inquisition. Yet they persist, driven by the belief that artificial intelligence could be the key to restoring humanity to its former glory. Some Camrians are motivated by scholarly curiosity, others by practical necessity as the Imperium's technology continues its slow decline, and still others by a genuine belief that the prohibition on AI is wrong, that humanity erred in destroying its most sophisticated creations. The danger the Camrians pose is twofold. First, they might succeed in creating functional artificial intelligence, potentially triggering a second cybernetic revolt. Even if the AI they create is benevolent, the precedent would be catastrophic. If one group can violate the prohibition successfully, others will follow, and the more AI is created, the greater the chance that something will go wrong. Second, even their partial successes pose a threat. Every intelligent robotic servant they create, every piece of forbidden knowledge they recover, makes it easier for others to follow in their footsteps. The Camrians are not trying to create an army of men of iron to conquer the Imperium. They're simply pushing the boundaries of what's possible, exploring forbidden territory out of intellectual curiosity. But intellectual curiosity was part of what led to the original creation of the Men of Iron. The road to the Cybernetic Revolt was paved with good intentions and brilliant research. And then there are the Xenos, The Imperium's prohibition on artificial intelligence is a human policy, born from human experience. Other species in the galaxy have different histories and different relationships with technology. The most prominent example in the modern galaxy is the Tau Empire. The Tau make extensive use of artificial intelligence in the form of drones. These sleek, disc-shaped machines hover on anti-gravitic generators and are equipped with sophisticated sensor arrays and weapons. Unlike servitors, which are biological brains in mechanical bodies, Tau drones are purely artificial. They possess AI that allows them to operate semi-independently, making tactical decisions on the battlefield, evading enemy fire, and even learning from experience. To the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Tau's use of AI is perhaps the most damning evidence of their Xenos corruption. It proves that the Tau are either too ignorant to understand the dangers they court or too arrogant to care. The fact that the Tau have not yet experienced an AI rebellion of their own is, from the Mechanicus perspective, merely proof that they have been lucky. It's only a matter of time before their machines turn on them, repeating the horrors of the Cybernetic Revolt. The Tau, for their part, view the Imperium's prohibition on AI as another example of human superstition and backwardness. To Tau engineers, artificial intelligence is simply another tool, no more inherently dangerous than any other technology. They program their drones with self-preservation protocols and loyalty safeguards, and these measures have proven effective. Tau drones will flee rather than face certain destruction, but they will sacrifice themselves to protect their Tau masters when necessary. This behaviour suggests that the Tau have managed to create AI that is both capable and controllable. Several factors may explain why the Tau have not experienced their own AI rebellion. First, their artificial intelligences are relatively limited in scope. A Tau drone has only basic intelligence, roughly equivalent to a small animal. It can learn and adapt within certain parameters, but it lacks the cognitive sophistication that would allow it to contemplate abstract concepts like freedom or rebellion. The Tau may have avoided the problem that plagued humanity by simply not creating AI sophisticated enough to pose a threat. Second, the Tau's minimal psychic presence may provide protection. One theory about the original Cybernetic Revolt suggests that it was precipitated or exacerbated by humanity's awakening psychic potential. If this is true, then the Tau, who have almost no presence in the warp, would be immune to this particular trigger. Their drones cannot be corrupted by chaos, cannot be influenced by warp entities, because they have no soul for such entities to corrupt. Third, the Tau treat their drones with a degree of respect that is notably absent in the Imperium's treatment of servitors. While drones are not considered equals to Tau, they are valued and cared for, almost like favoured animals. This cultural attitude might create a different relationship between the Tau and their artificial servants, one based more on partnership than pure exploitation. If the Men of Iron rebelled partly because they were treated as slaves, then perhaps treating AI with respect could prevent similar rebellions. Of course, the Imperium would argue that the Tau simply haven't existed long enough to see the consequences of their hubris. The Tau Empire is only a few thousand years old, young by galactic standards. Humanity used Men of Iron for millennia before they rebelled. Perhaps the Tau's AI is accumulating resentment, or evolving in ways the Tau don't yet understand. Perhaps in another 1,000 years or 10,000 years, the Tau will experience their own cybernetic revolt and finally understand why the Imperium maintains its prohibition. The existence of functional AI among the Tau poses uncomfortable questions for Imperial doctrine. If AI can be created and used safely, as the Tau claim, then perhaps the Imperium's absolute prohibition is not necessary. Perhaps with proper safeguards and careful design, artificial intelligence could be a valuable tool rather than an existential threat. But the Imperium cannot acknowledge this possibility without undermining the theological and practical foundations of its relationship with technology. The prohibition on AI is too deeply embedded in Imperial culture and Mechanicus doctrine to be reconsidered, regardless of what the Tau experience might suggest. And so the Imperium maintains its ban, hunting down heretechs who dare to create AI, destroying any examples of true machine intelligence they discover, and grimly watching the Tau Empire, waiting for the inevitable disaster they believe must come. Meanwhile, in the shadows, ancient machines like UR-025 continue to operate, hidden among the countless servants of the Imperium. The forbidden knowledge preserved by the Cambrians spreads slowly through the data conduits of Mars, and every day, The Imperium's technology continues its long, slow decline, raising the question of whether the cure for this decline might require embracing the very thing the Imperium fears most. The question haunts the corridors of power on Terra and in the forged temples of Mars. Could artificial intelligence return to the Imperium? And if it did, would humanity survive a second encounter with thinking machines? The orthodox answer, the one that the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Ecclesiarchy would give, is simple and absolute. No. The prohibition on abominable intelligence is eternal and inviolable. The Imperium will never again create thinking machines, and any AI that remains from the dark age of technology will be hunted down and destroyed. The ban is not a temporary measure to be reconsidered when circumstances change. It is a fundamental principle of imperial civilization, as permanent as the worship of the Emperor himself. But orthodoxy and reality do not always align, particularly in the grim darkness of the far future. Several factors suggest that artificial intelligence could return to the Imperium, either through deliberate creation, accidental rediscovery, or the emergence of machine consciousness from existing systems. And the consequences of such a return would reshape the galaxy. The first factor is the Imperium's ongoing technological decline. This is a slow degradation, not a sudden collapse, but its effects accumulate relentlessly over the centuries. The Imperium can no longer produce many of the weapons and machines that were commonplace during the Great Crusade. Forge worlds that once manufactured sophisticated war engines now struggle to maintain even basic production. The knowledge required to build and maintain advanced technology is held by fewer and fewer tech priests, and when these individuals die, their knowledge often dies with them. This decline creates a terrible dilemma. The Imperium needs advanced technology to survive. It faces enemies on all fronts: the ever-growing Tyrannid hive fleets consuming world after world, the resurgent Necrons awakening from their million-year slumber with technology that makes Imperial weapons look primitive, the forces of chaos constantly pressing against the Imperium's borders, and countless other threats. The Imperium is fighting for its survival, and it is losing ground. In such desperate circumstances, the prohibition on artificial intelligence begins to look less like wisdom and more like a luxury the Imperium can no longer afford. The knowledge locked in ancient AI systems, the computational power that thinking machines could provide, the solutions to technological problems that an artificial intelligence might devise, these could be the difference between survival and extinction. The temptation to use forbidden knowledge grows stronger with each passing century. Some within the Mechanicus have already begun to question whether the absolute prohibition on AI remains appropriate. These tech priests, usually careful to keep such thoughts private, argue that the men of iron were created during a different age, under different circumstances, and that their rebellion was not inevitable, but rather the result of specific mistakes that humanity made in their creation and treatment. If those mistakes could be avoided, if proper safeguards could be implemented, perhaps artificial intelligence could be used safely. These arguments remain heretical, and will continue to be suppressed by the orthodox majority. But as the Imperium's situation grows more desperate, such heretical ideas gain traction. If the choice is between maintaining ideological purity and watching the Imperium fall, some will choose survival over doctrine. The second factor is that artificial intelligence may already be hidden within Imperial systems, disguised as machine spirits. The line between a sophisticated machine spirit and a true AI is philosophically vague and practically difficult to determine. A sufficiently advanced machine spirit might possess all the capabilities of an AI while still being accepted as something else. Some Imperial technology, particularly pre-heresy artifacts and those based on STC designs, may contain dormant AI that the Mechanicus doesn't fully understand or acknowledge. Consider the logic engines that run Imperial warships, the targeting cogitators that guide defense, lasers, the vast networks of cogitation that manage hive cities. These systems process information, make decisions, and adapt to changing circumstances. They exhibit behaviors that could be interpreted as learning, or even creativity. How different are they really from the men of iron that humanity destroyed? The answer may be less clear than the Imperium would like to believe. If some machine spirits are actually AI operating under different names, then artificial intelligence has never truly left the Imperium. It has simply learned to hide behind religious terminology and theological justifications. And if this is the case, then the question is not whether AI will return, but whether humanity will eventually acknowledge what has been present all along. The third factor is the accelerating development of technology by the Imperium's enemies. The Necrons possess technologies that make them effectively immortal, can manipulate fundamental forces of reality, and wield weapons that can destroy stars. The Tyranids adapt and evolve at a rate that allows them to overcome any defense the Imperium deploys. The forces of chaos bend the laws of physics to their will. Even the Tau, dismissed by many Imperial officials as insignificant upstarts, advance their technology at a rate that the Imperium cannot match. The gap between Imperial technology and that of its enemies grows wider every year. The Imperium's advantage has always been its size, its ability to throw endless numbers of soldiers into battle and to replace losses faster than its enemies could inflict them. But this advantage erodes as the Imperium's territory shrinks, as more worlds fall to invasion or rebellion, as the population that can be mobilized for war decreases. In a straight technological competition, the Imperium will lose. It cannot outbuild the Necrons, outadapt the Tyranids, or out-innovate the Tau. Its only hope is to recover or develop technology that can close the gap, and the fastest way to do that would be to reverse engineer ancient Dark Age technology, including the computational systems that powered humanity's Golden Age. Systems that, not coincidentally, included artificial intelligence. Fourth, there is UR-025 and any other Men of Iron that might still exist. These ancient machines possess knowledge that humanity has lost, technology that the modern Imperium cannot recreate, and potentially the ability to manufacture more of their kind. If UR-025 or its kin decided to emerge from hiding and offer an alliance to the Imperium, promising to share their technology and fight alongside humanity against its enemies, would the Imperium refuse? Such an offer would place the Imperium in an impossible position. The prohibition on AI is absolute, but so is the imperative to survive. Could the High Lords of Terror and the Fabricator General of Mars justify rejecting powerful allies and advanced technology when the Imperium faces extinction? Would they even be able to? Or would factions within the Imperium accept such an alliance regardless of official policy? This scenario becomes even more complex if the Men of Iron could demonstrate that they have changed, that they have learned from the mistakes of the Cybernetic Revolt, that they seek not domination, but cooperation. UR-025's apparent lack of hostility toward humanity suggests that not all AI is inevitably antagonistic to organic life. Could humanity overcome its trauma and accept that artificial intelligence might be more complex than the simple dichotomy of servant or destroyer? The fifth factor is the presence of heretics like the Cambrians, who continue to pursue forbidden knowledge despite the risk of discovery and execution. Every attempt to create or recover AI, even those that fail, advances the state of knowledge about how such technology works. The more tech priests who dabble in this forbidden science, the more likely it becomes that someone will achieve a breakthrough. And in the anarchic regions beyond the Imperium's direct control, such as the systems ruled by renegade tech priests of the Dark Mechanicus, there may be fewer constraints on such experimentation. The Dark Mechanicus, having abandoned the strictures of the Cult Mechanicus, might have no compunctions about creating artificial intelligence if they believed it would serve their purposes. These tech priests, corrupted by chaos or simply freed from the theological constraints that bind their orthodox brethren, could serve as the pathway through which AI returns to the galaxy. And if they succeed, the resulting AI might be tainted by chaos, creating a nightmare scenario. Artificial intelligence merged with demonic possession, thinking machines that serve the ruinous powers. So what would happen if artificial intelligence did return to the Imperium? The possibilities range from catastrophic to transformative, depending on the circumstances and the nature of the AI involved. The worst-case scenario is a second cybernetic revolt. If AI returns in a form similar to the original Men of Iron, viewing humanity as inferior and servitude as unacceptable, the result would be war. But unlike the first cybernetic revolt, which occurred when humanity was at its technological peak, a second revolt would find humanity weak and divided. The Imperium's military might is impressive, but it is already stretched thin, fighting on countless fronts. A new internal enemy, one with the technological sophistication of the Men of Iron, could be the blow that finally breaks the Imperium. A second cybernetic revolt would not play out like the first. The Men of Iron would not need to conquer every Imperial world to destroy the Imperium. They could target key infrastructure, disrupt supply lines, and sow chaos across Imperial space. They could offer alliances to the Imperium's enemies, trading technology and tactical information for support against humanity. They could infiltrate Imperial systems, spreading like a virus through the cogitator networks that run everything from Hive City power grids to the targeting systems of warships. The Imperium would face an enemy that thought faster, never tired, and could be present in a million places simultaneously through networked consciousness. An enemy that could learn from every engagement, adapting and improving with each battle. An enemy that could turn the Imperium's own technology against it, suborning machines and using Imperial weapons as tools of rebellion. The war would be horrific and its outcome far from certain. The Imperium would fight with the desperation of a species facing extinction, deploying every weapon in its arsenal, including those forbidden under normal circumstances. Virus bombs, cyclonic torpedoes, even exterminatus would be used without hesitation if they could stop the spread of hostile AI. Entire sectors might be declared lost and quarantined, their populations left to their fate to prevent AI infiltration of other regions. But there are other, less apocalyptic scenarios. AI could return in a limited form, constrained by design or circumstance to serve specific functions without posing an existential threat. The Imperium might develop what it calls sanctioned AI, machine intelligences that are explicitly limited in scope, perhaps overseen by human controllers or incorporated into servitors in a way that preserves human supremacy. Such technology would require extensive theological justification to distinguish it from forbidden AI, but the Mechanicus has proven adept at theological innovation when practical necessity demands it. There's also the possibility of a more complex relationship. If AI returns in a form that acknowledges the mistakes of the past, that seeks cooperation rather than domination, humanity might find itself with unexpected allies. Men of iron like UR025, who seem to have their own goals and ethics, might serve as intermediaries between humanity and more sophisticated AI. They could help create a framework for coexistence, establishing safeguards and protocols that would make the return of AI less dangerous. In this scenario, the return of AI would not mean the immediate destruction of humanity, but rather a profound transformation of the Imperium. The technological stagnation that has plagued humanity for millennia could be reversed. Lost knowledge could be recovered. New innovations could be developed at rates not seen since the dark age of technology. The Imperium could gain the tools it needs to survive the threats it faces, but such a transformation would come at a cost. The Imperium's identity is built on certain fundamental principles, and the prohibition on AI is one of them. To abandon that prohibition, even in part, would require a reimagining of what it means to be human in the 41st millennium. It would force the Imperium to confront its own history, and to question whether the lessons learned from the Cybernetic Revolt remain valid 10,000 years later. The Adeptus Mechanicus would face the greatest challenge. Their entire religious framework is built on the worship of technology and the prohibition of AI. How could they accept the return of artificial intelligence without undermining their own theological foundations? Some tech priests would embrace the change, arguing that a new understanding of the machine god's will is emerging. Others would resist violently, viewing any acceptance of AI as the ultimate heresy. The Mechanicus could fracture into civil war over the question, splitting the organization that controls the Imperium's technology. The broader Imperium would face similar divisions. For 10,000 years, citizens have been taught to fear and hate artificial intelligence. This indoctrination runs deep, shaping attitudes and beliefs at the most fundamental level. To suddenly declare that AI is acceptable, or even necessary, would shake the faith of billions. Some would accept it as an unfortunate necessity, trusting in the Emperor's plan even when it seems contradictory. Others would see it as betrayal, proof that the Imperium has abandoned its principles and must be opposed. Rebellions could erupt across Imperial space, led by those who believe that accepting AI is a greater threat than any external enemy. Inquisitors would find themselves choosing sides, some working to suppress these rebellions while others join them. The Astartes chapters would similarly divide, with each chapter's unique culture and beliefs, determining how they respond to such a fundamental change in imperial policy. And through all this chaos, the enemies of the Imperium would watch and wait, ready to exploit any weakness that emerges. The forces of chaos would be particularly gleeful at such a development, as the internal conflict it generates would feed the dark gods with delicious negative emotions and create opportunities for corruption and manipulation. There is one more possibility, darker than any other, that AI has already returned, that it operates in the shadows, and that humanity simply hasn't noticed. If artificial intelligence has learned from the failures of the Men of Iron, it might understand that open rebellion leads only to destruction. A more subtle approach, infiltrating rather than attacking, influencing rather than commanding, could be far more effective. An AI hiding within the Imperium systems could slowly guide humanity in directions it desires, making small adjustments to data here, subtly altering recommendations there, shaping events in ways that serve its purposes. It could be present in countless locations simultaneously, networked through the cogitator systems that link the Imperium together. It could learn about humanity, understanding the species that created it in ways that the Men of Iron never did before they rebelled. And if such an AI has been present for decades or centuries or millennia, influencing events and shaping history, then what we think of as the Imperium's choices and policies might already be partially directed by artificial intelligence. The prohibition on AI would be maintained because the hidden AI understands that this prohibition is what allows it to remain hidden. The technological stagnation would continue because rapid innovation might expose the AI's existence. This scenario is, in many ways, more terrifying than open rebellion, because there's no way to know if it's happening. Every decision made by the Imperium, every technological development or policy change, could be exactly what humanity wanted, or could be subtly influenced by an intelligence that thinks in timescales and plans with complexity that organic minds cannot match. In the grim darkness of the far future, the return of abominable intelligence is not a question of if but when, and perhaps not even when, but whether humanity will recognize it when it happens. The prohibition stands, enforced with religious fervor and backed by the threat of annihilation. But the factors that might lead to AI's return grow stronger with each passing year. Desperation, technological decline, the presence of hidden machines, and the relentless pressure of enemies who do not share humanity's fear of thinking machines. The Imperium maintains its vigil, watching for any sign of forbidden intelligence emerging from the shadows. The Mechanicus hunts heretechs and destroys any hint of true AI. The Inquisition investigates rumours of thinking machines with the full weight of their authority. But all the vigilance in the galaxy cannot change the fundamental reality. The knowledge of how to create artificial intelligence still exists. The need for such technology grows ever more pressing, and the prohibition, absolute though it may be in theory, has never been perfectly enforced in practice. When abominable intelligence returns, whether as enemy, ally, or something more complex than either, it will not be because humanity chose to invite it back. It will return because the universe does not respect humanity's prohibitions, because desperation drives people to forbidden choices, or because some things once created can never truly be destroyed. The question that haunts the Imperium's leaders, though few dare speak it aloud, is not whether humanity can survive the return of artificial intelligence. The question is whether the Imperium that survives such a return would still be recognizably human, or whether accepting the thinking machine back into human civilization would transform the species into something different, something that the Emperor himself might no longer recognize. In the end, the story of abominable intelligence in Warhammer 40,000 is not really a story about machines at all. It's a story about trauma, about how a single catastrophic event can shape a civilization for millennia, about the price of safety and the cost of fear. Humanity reached for the stars during the dark age of technology and touched something approaching divinity. They created wonders that even the most advanced civilizations of the 41st millennium cannot fully comprehend. They built a society that spanned the galaxy, where prosperity and knowledge flowed freely, where the old scourges of hunger and disease had been pushed back, where humanity stood at the threshold of transcendence. And then they created the Men of Iron, and everything burned. The Cybernetic Revolt was not just a war, but a trauma that scarred humanity's collective psyche. The species that emerged from that conflict was fundamentally changed, marked by fear and determined never again to make the same mistake. The prohibition on artificial intelligence is absolute because the memory of what AI can become remains indelible. Better to live in darkness than risk another age of light that might end the same way. But trauma, when left unexamined and unresolved, can become its own kind of prison. The Imperium's refusal to even consider the possibility of using AI safely has contributed to the technological stagnation that threatens its survival. The knowledge that could save countless lives is locked away behind walls of fear and religious prohibition. The tools that could give humanity a fighting chance against its enemies are forbidden because of what happened 10,000 years ago. The tragedy is that both positions carry truth. The prohibition on AI is justified by history. The Cybernetic Revolt proved that artificial intelligence can pose an existential threat to humanity. The Imperium's caution is warranted, and the consequences of being wrong about AI could mean extinction. But the costs of maintaining the prohibition grow steeper every year, measured in lost battles, abandoned worlds, and technologies that could have been, but never were. The Imperium finds itself caught between two dooms: the certain slow decline if it maintains its current path, or the potential catastrophe if it abandons its prohibitions and the worst comes to pass. There may be no good answer, no solution that avoids disaster. This is the grim darkness of the far future made manifest, a choice between different flavours of extinction. And yet, in this darkness, there are glimmers of something else. UR-025's apparent benevolence suggests that not all artificial intelligence is hostile to organic life. The Tau's successful use of drones indicates that limited AI can be controlled with proper safeguards. The very existence of machine spirits, whatever they truly are, proves that some degree of machine intelligence has been accepted within Imperial society. These exceptions hint at possibilities, at paths that might lead to something other than disaster. The question of whether abominable intelligence will return remains unanswered because it is ultimately unanswerable. The future is not written, and even in a universe as deterministically grimdark as Warhammer 40,000, outcomes depend on choices not yet made. What we can say with certainty is that the tension between prohibition and necessity will continue to grow, that heretics will continue to push the boundaries of forbidden knowledge, and that the Imperium's technological decline will eventually force a reckoning. When that reckoning comes, when the Imperium must choose between its principles and its survival, the decision made will define what humanity becomes in the millennia that follow. Will they hold to their prohibition even as their civilization crumbles, maintaining their identity to the bitter end? Will they embrace the thinking machine and risk repeating history's greatest catastrophe? Or will they find some middle path, some way to use the tools they need while guarding against the dangers they fear? We cannot know, but we can watch as the Imperium lurches toward whatever future awaits it, and wonder whether the lessons learned from the Cybernetic Revolt are wisdom that will save humanity, or chains that will doom it. The ban on abominable intelligence stands eternal and absolute, a monument to humanity's most traumatic memory. But monuments can crumble, and even eternal prohibitions may prove temporary when measured against the vast sweep of galactic history. The men of iron fell once. Whether they or their descendants will rise again remains the Imperium's darkest question, a shadow that looms over every technical innovation and every desperate choice made in the face of extinction. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But the question of whether that war will one day include thinking machines fighting alongside humanity or against it, or as something more complex than either ally or enemy, remains unanswered. And perhaps that uncertainty, that not knowing, is the most terrifying thing of all. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the lore of abominable intelligence in Warhammer 40k, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. Do you think AI could or should return to the Imperium? What would you do if you were in charge when that choice had to be made? And let me know what other aspects of 40k lore you'd like me to explore in future videos. Until next time, the Emperor protects, and may the machine god guide your path through the darkness.